This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 43 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to ask the questions that you may have while listening to our broadcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult decisions.
So please relax, get yourself something nourishing to eat and drink, or if you're in the mood to make a bad food choice, do it.
You've come to the right place.
Yes. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me. In the first half, we have our recipe of the week from Charlie. In the second half, we're going to be sharing an interview that I did with Dr. Diana Mason on her show, Health Centra in the Catskills. And in our third half, Charlie is presenting a reading by Thích Nhất Hạnh from his book, Fear, Essential Wisdom for Getting Through the Storm. We have the info in our show notes if you happen to want to purchase this. So, Charlie, what are you making for me this week?
Key lime pie.
Oh, I love key lime pie.
Nice tart key lime pie, yes.
Yeah.
But, the common theory is that key lime pie originated in Key West, Florida. That was...
Well, where else would it originate?
Well, let's investigate, shall we? What do you think may be in New York City?
Well, everything comes from New York City, right?
You and I didn't come from New York City. We came from Detroit.
Well, okay.
Right.
You have me there.
Okay.
But I'm not a key lime pie, even though I'm a tart.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. So everyone just expected, key lime pie, Key West, Florida, until the Borden Milk Company, remember Elsie the cow? I don't know if she spoke personally on behalf of the company, but the Borden Milk Company came in and debated that, saying that they made the first key lime pie in their New York City test kitchen in 1931.
I rest my case.
There you are. Just a side note, Borden Milk Company was here in New York. Also, Nabisco was here in New York. The Oreo cookie, Marianne, was invented here.
The perfect combo, milk and cookies.
There you are. Borden and Nabisco. One night of passion, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
So. Borden argued key lime pie, their New York test kitchen in 1931, as a way of selling more sweetened condensed milk. Floridians,
that would do it.
Yep, Floridians were outraged and began trying to. It's Florida. What else is new?
Sorry, Florida. He didn't mean that.
No, not at all. So Floridians were outraged at this and began trying to show they were the originators of the key lime custard confection. But in truth, there's no real documentation of who started it all. But here at Everyone Dies, we love telling a good story, especially if it's about food.
Especially about food.
Which takes us back to the 1800s and William Curry, a ship salvager and Florida's first self-made millionaire, commonly referred to as Rich Bill, had a cook that was simply known or known simply, and we look forward to hearing from the grammarians in the audience, as Aunt Sally. It was Aunt Sally who created the pie in the late 1800s. Some historians think that Aunt Sally didn't create the key lime pie, but probably perfected a delicacy that was a creation of area fishermen. Which brings us to the next theory. Sponge fishermen.
Good God.
No connection or relation to SpongeBob SquarePants. Around Key West used to stay at sea for quite a while. Sponge fishing was a booming new business in South Florida, but the margins were slim, so the rations were meager on a boat. some sugar, eggs, canned milk, soda, crackers, some nuts, and citrus fruit. Soon, the cool, tart pie they made with their rations became a staple on those fishing trips. One of these men, maybe even the one who made that inaugural pie, shared the recipe with some womenfolk. Perhaps she shared it with Aunt Sally. The plot thickens. Prior to the building of the 113-mile overseas highway in 1930, which ran through the Florida Keys to Key West, there was no fresh milk, no refrigeration, and no ice was available in the Keys.
What'd they put in their drinks?
Their fingers to stir it. That's what I imagine. Because this was a time before, when martinis were stirred and not shaken. So that's my guess. I just hope they washed the finger before going back and forth.
Yeah.
So because of this lack of milk, local cooks had to rely on canned sweetened condensed milk, which was invented in 1856 by Gail Borden. Key lime may be the star ingredient of the key lime pie, but it is the sweetened condensed milk that makes it so smooth and delicious. Almost every family in Florida has a recipe for key lime pie, and they all claim it is the only authentic version. Aficionados of key lime pies argue endlessly about the proper way to make one. Graham cracker or pastry crust, meringue on top or whipped cream, or neither. Cooked or uncooked filling, olives or a twist in that martini. The one thing agreed on is that under no circumstances should you ever add green food coloring, especially to a martini. The filling of the authentic key lime pie is a light yellow. Key limes are smaller in size than a regular Persian lime, but don't let their smaller size fool you. It is not the size.
Size isn't always.
Marianne, it is not the size of the wand, but the magic in it, if you catch my drift.
It's not the size of the ship, but the motion of the ocean.
Okay, I don't have another one to top that. They are more fragrant, and when I say they, I'm referring to the Persian limes. They are more fragrant and have way more flavor. Their skin is thinner, they have more seeds, and are more yellow in color, but they are known to contain more juice than regular limes. Key limes are more common all over the world than they are here in the U.S., where many of the commercial crops in the Florida Keys were wiped out during a hurricane in the 1920s, replaced with Persian lime crops. Key limes are also known as West Indian or Mexican limes. I'm exhausted.
Who knew this was so complicated?
I don't know. But I'm still exhausted. All that.
I am.
So that we can offer you a key lime slab pie recipe that will make your pie the hit of your next funeral lunch. And you have a great story to go with it. You're welcome. So,
thank you, Charles.
Go to our webpage for that recipe, other recipes, and additional resources for this program. We hope you will follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. As a licensed nonprofit organization, we are dependent on the kindness of our beloved listeners and always appreciate your donations. And hey, they are tax deductible. Please go to our webpage to donate in support of our work. www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org. Marianne?
That was interesting. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.
So for our second half, we're pleased to bring you an interview from Health Etc. in the Catskills, WIOX Radio, where I was interviewed by Dr. Diana Mason about talking with children about death. Also, please check out our children's book, Everyone Dies, and yes, it's normal. We have that information in our show notes.
Welcome to Health Cetera's podcast. The topics of death and dying have long been taboo within American culture. Dr. Marian Mazzo is a registered nurse and gerontologist who is working to shift the way people view death, including the way children do. With the recent publication of their children's book titled Everyone Dies, and Yes, It's Normal, both Marian Mazzo and co-author Darlene Dominic use imagery and language geared toward young audiences to help them normalize the reality of death in a palatable and important way. On this podcast, Dr. Diana Mason, registered nurse and host of this program, discusses children's understanding of death and dying with Dr. Marian Mazzo. This interview first aired on Health Cetera in the Catskills on WIOX Radio on August 18th, 2021.
I'm Diana Mason. This is WIOX Radio, live and local in the Catskill Mountains, community radio. Dr. Marian Mazzo is a registered nurse and an expert in palliative and end-of-life care, and she's the founder and chair of Everyone Dies, a website and a podcast by the same name that focuses on topics related to death and dying and palliative care. And she's written this book for children, that's titled Everyone Dies, and Yes, It's Normal. And I invited Marianne to come back onto Health Cetera, and to talk with us about having conversations about dying with children. Marianne, thank you so much for coming back on today.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. I appreciate the invitation.
So, we talked before about why it's so hard, but let's set that context again briefly. Why do we have such a hard time with talking about death and dying?
Well, I think that we're very removed from the whole death and dying experience. You know, when we primarily lived on farms, we saw birth all the time, we saw death all the time. It was just a fact of life. It was a circle of life. And we are very removed from it now. We also have this sense of wanting to know, do we stop existing when we die? And so there's that fear attached to that. There's, religious reasons for why we fear death, fear of what's on the other side. Are we going to hell? Are we, depending on your religious background. So there's a lot of sort of perfect storms that feed into this idea that we don't know what it is. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't ever see it. And we're pretty glad generally that we don't have to see it. And we certainly do not want to talk about it, because if we talk about it, it might make it happen. And so we're going to just pretend that that's not part of life, and kind of just ignore it, and we can't ignore it. If we don't pay attention to our mortality, we can end up in situations at the end of life where things are happening to us that we wouldn't have chosen if we had sat and talked about it. So there's good reasons to think about, what do I want? How do I want it? If you get a serious illness, do you want treatment? Do you want to go to the Bahamas? What is it that you want? Yeah. And make those plans and make conscious choices.
Now, with children, we've particularly hidden death and dying from children. I can remember growing up that there was this sense that you just remove the child, particularly young children, from the situation, and you don't talk about it. You say, well, they went to sleep or they went away. How did we get to that point? And is it culture bound? Is it just us?
It's not just us, because there's also, religious and cultural viewpoints that play into it. But in terms of in the United States, it's part of it is we don't know how to talk about it. What do you say to a child when their dog has died? Well, they're in a better place. Well, to a child, what do you mean? What better place could there be except with me? Yeah. That doesn't make any sense to a child. And then the conversation gets shut down. We don't explore or talk about sex really well. and we don't talk about the end of life really well. And I think both of those we could do a much better job in terms of how we talk to our children. If we treat things as a fact of life, which is what they are, children just accept it. They don't get all upset about it. It's like, oh, that's how it happens? Okay. And they move on to the next thing. With children, what you want to do is you want to answer whatever question that they're asking you. You don't have to give them more information. You just have to answer their question, but be honest. Don't make stuff up. Don't say they went to sleep, because when it's time for that child to go to sleep tonight, they're not going to want to, because, the dog went to sleep, and where's the dog now? I'm not going to take that chance. So children are concrete. Answer their question, explain to them what happened in terms of what it is they want to know, and then move on.
Now, your book, entitled Everyone Dies and Yes, It's Normal, addresses this taboo that we've had around talking to children about death and dying. Why did you do the book, and what are you trying to accomplish with it? And who is it for? Is it for the child or is it for the adult?
Well, that's a good question, because I've had many adults say I need to read it too, because there's so much, like I said, religious and cultural kinds of ideas as to why we die, that we don't stop to think that there's really only 3 reasons that people die. And so when we're talking with children, we can be very matter of fact. Everyone dies, just like the book, everyone poops. Everyone dies. It's just what happens. And here, let me tell you why that happened. And when you say that to children, they say, oh, my kids are, 24, 25 now. And from when they were very young, I always said, here's what's going on. And they will still to this day say, if I say so-and-so is sick, they'll say, are they very, very sick? Because what the language is that I've taught them and what's in this book is that there's 3 reasons that people die. They die because they're very, very sick, or they're very, very old, or they're very, very hurt. And there are no other reasons why people die. And so children can put that into, it's like, so what happened to him? Oh, there was an accident. He was very, very hurt and he died. Oh, what happened to the dog? Oh, he was very, very old and he died. Oh, and that's the answer that you get from children. Just say, oh. And so when I was working in palliative care, and particularly when I was at the VA hospital on the palliative care consult team, whenever we had vets that had children, the team, we were primarily gerontologists, but for some reason they would say, oh, Marianne, you talk with the children. And so I would talk with the children, and I didn't have a lot of really good resources in terms of, like you have Fall of Freddie the Leaf, which is a wonderful story by Leo Scaglia.
What's the name of it?
It's called The Fall of Freddie the Leaf. And it's about a leaf in the fall who is, trying to decide if he's going to let go of the tree or not. And what he learns in the course of the book is that you fall off the tree, you become part of a life-giving force for the tree who's going to come back in the springtime. It's a great story, it's a great book, but it still doesn't concretely tell children, why do people die? And that's what they're asking. That's what they want to know. And so I always said when I retired, there were a few things on my list, and one of them was I wanted to write this book so children could have something simple, a common language that they can have with their parents and their family and, hopefully their friends that say, oh, this happened. Oh, how come? Oh, they were very, very sick.
So Marianne,
and that,
yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. What did you want to ask?
So when you were asked, you are specialized in geriatrics. when you were asked to talk with children, are these children who were dying or children whose maybe their parents were dying or loved ones were dying?
Children whose parents were dying.
So there is the issue of that I've been totally intrigued with about when the child themselves are dying, when the children themselves are dying. And certainly, recently I saw a documentary, and I don't remember the details of it, but I do remember the visual of I think the parent talking about the child. The health professionals were encouraging the family to have the conversation with the child, and that was like, we can't do this. And the fact that and I understand that, how difficult that would be. And probably the fear that you're going to frighten your child, who's already very sick. But it ended up that indeed the conversation was a relief for the child. They felt like it was okay. They were ready to go. They knew it anyway. Talk a little bit about when the child is dying and the importance of having the conversation, and how do you know that you should have the conversation?
Well, children know what's going on. They hear everything. They, tune into your emotions. There's very little that children miss. And so they know they're going to the hospital and their friends aren't doing this. They know what's going on. They see people whispering in the hallway. And what children will do, and depending on their age, what children will do is they fill in the blanks. They say they're whispering, something's wrong. What could it be? And they will make up their own story for what's going on. And it's a relief for them when somebody tells them the actual truth. Here's what's going on. Yeah. You're very, very sick. This is a disease that we don't have the tools to cure. And so when people are very, very sick, they die. And that's what's happening to you. And then children can say, oh, okay. And let me tell you, from my experience, that's what they do. Is they say, okay, well, so what are we going to do until then? It's that whole Make-A-Wish idea. It's like, well, let's go to Disneyland. Let's go do this. Yeah. What do I have the strength to be able to do? Yeah. And it is so hard for us as a parent to even imagine the death of our child. But for the child themselves, they don't have the fears. They don't have, 40 or however old we are, years of misinformation and fear. They're like, oh, all right. So what are we going to do? And it's very difficult. When I worked for hospice, I had a child who was actively dying, and two of us went out because there were young children in the home, and there were the parents, and there was word it was dying. And I was talking with and taking care of the family, and there was a little boy. So his older brother was dying, and he had all of his ninja warriors laid out on the floor. And so he told us a while ago, because ninjas were really big then. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, I have to decide which ninja that I'm going to give to my brother to take with him when he dies. And, this one has these powers. This one has these powers. Now, I can't tell you what all the powers were of all the different colored ninja warriors. But so we had this this discussion about, well, when you die, what ninja warrior do you need with you? And then he made a decision about which warrior he was going to give to his brother. Wow,
that's quite a story.
And so it's children are very profound and very smart beyond what we think they are. And if we don't treat them as people with little brains, they're going to make up something far worse than, I don't know, it would be worse than their death. But you see what I'm saying? They will
something
make
that's
up
more
story.
frightening to them. something that's more frightening to them. So let's talk about this scenario. So we have a lot of older people here in this community, and many of them have grandchildren. And so let's say that I have a grandchild and I'm dying. How would you guide me through a conversation with my grandchild about that I'm dying? And maybe we could take it from different ages, under 5 to 12, and then as a teenager.
So let's say if you're talking about, let's say a 2 to 4 year old, they're going to respond with sadness. They don't quite understand that death is permanent. In their minds, death is sort of like going on a vacation. Someone's left for a while, they're going to come back. And we can call them, we can text them, we can do all of that. And so it's hard in that age group for them to be able to say, I understand that I'm not going to see them again. You're going to have to repeat yourself. You're going to have to go over that more than once. You're going to have to say, as a parent, Grandma was, let's say she's very, very old. Grandma was very, very old, and she died, and she's not going to come back. And we miss her so much. And what can we do to think of Grandma? You could say, let's make Grandma's favorite cookies or whatever. You can be very concrete with children of that age, like between 2 and 4. If you're the grandma that is facing the end of your life, which, we go back to the premise, the reality that everyone dies, so we are all facing the end of our lives. We don't know when that's going to be. I would say, get a common language with your grandchild, and don't be stumbling over it. Don't be like, oh, cripe, what am I going to say now? Have your language ready. And that's why we say we can help you. If you have the book, you can sit down, you can read it with them. I just recently had somebody buy the book and read it to their grandchildren, and she wrote me a note and said they just loved it. And children particularly like the redundancy of the very, very. They're very, very old. And the reason you have that very, very in there is because everyone gets old, everyone gets sick, everyone gets hurt. But there's a difference when you're very, very. Yeah. So read the book to the children. Okay. Tell them, here's what's going on. And, what kinds of things would you want to help, like if I'm the grandparent, what kinds of things would you want to help remember me? What is something that I do that's just special between you and I? And so that then when I die, you can keep doing it.
Great.
So if it's a special recipe or if it's, I don't know, whatever it is, there's always this thing that this is something my grandmother did and this is how I remember her.
So what about a child who's preteen then? So let's say 6 to 12.
So if you're in that kind of like, so what did I just say, 2 to 4? So if you're talking like 4 to 9, they will tend to personify death. They think of it as something specific, like the Grim Reaper who is going to go after some unfortunate people. It doesn't occur to them. They haven't been told, or they don't understand yet because of their age, that everyone dies. In their minds, they are immune to death themselves. They're going to escape it. And they might also, in this age group, kind of be preoccupied with death. They're going to ask people, what happens when you die? They don't yet really realize that death is permanent. They understand that there's a separation. But the idea of a separation can be very anxiety-provoking for them. I don't want to be separated from Grandma. I don't want to not be able to see her. So what you want to do is you want to be really honest with them. Like if the grandchild says, Grandma, are you sick enough to die? Be really honest. Honey, everyone dies. I don't think I'm sick enough to die. and I'm here now to play with you and talk with you and read books with you and sew or whatever it is. Right now, we're fine. Kids will ask at this age about like burial and cremation and all of that stuff. You don't want to let the kids fill in the blanks. Mm-hmm. I did an interview on one of my shows with a 5-year-old. His name is William V, and he has this whole thing about zombies. Mm. And he has woven the idea of zombies into death and dying. So if you don't give him actual facts, what they do is they take something that they've heard about and they weave it in. Yeah. So you want to give them simple, truthful answers, let them know what the actual truth is. Watch closely. If somebody's died, like, are they feeling guilty? Are they thinking it is some way their fault that this person has died? Are they thinking it as a punishment? Mm. So again, just life would be so simpler. Well, so simpler. You tell I went to college. It would be so much more simple if people would be just honest and straightforward about what happened.
So, Marianne, we're almost out of time, and I want to just touch on something, and then have you talk about how people can get the book and get more information about your website. But it seems to I really like what you're saying about, regardless of the age, what can we create that's just special between the two of us that we can remember each other by. It seems like no matter what the age, that kind of whether it's a video that you're making with your 16-year-old where you're singing together or what have you, 16-year-old grandchild or what have you, something that is meaningful to them, that would remind them and bring them some joy in the memory. So I really like that. And I really am just really grateful that you wrote this book. I think it's a really important resource for people to, if we're having trouble talking to each other as adults about death and dying, we're really going to struggle with talking to the children. And they need, as you said, they deserve the honest conversation. So how do people get the book? Give the title again and how they get it.
So you can go to Amazon. You can go to Barnes & Noble. We have autographed copies that you can order from our website. So if you want it, autographed by Darlene and I, and if you want it, inscribed to somebody, you can go through the website and we'll do that for you. And the website is everyonediesthebook.com. Just all spelled out, everyonediesthebook.com. Or you could look it up by my last name, Matzo, on the website. And I think I'd like you to know that the woman I wrote the book with, Darlene Dominic, we met in kindergarten.
Wow.
We've known each other for over 40 years. Wow. And we joined together in writing this book. I knew what I wanted to say, and she's a tremendous writer, and so she was able to pull the ideas together. So that's the co-author.
Great. Well, Marianne Mazzo, thank you so much. And your website, where there's lots of good resources, podcasts, give the website again. Not the book website, the general website.
Yeah. For the podcast, it's everyonedies.org, and it's EVERY, the number 1, DIES.org. And it's the number 1 because spelled out, it wasn't available. So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And we've been talking with Dr. Marianne Mazzo, a registered nurse and palliative care expert, who's the lead author on the book for children, Everyone Dies, and Yes, It's Normal. Thank you so much, Marianne. It's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to a podcast of HealthCetera in the Catskills. For more podcasts and discussions of important health issues and policies affecting health, go to HealthCetera's website and blog at www.healthmediapolicy.com. That's www.healthmediapolicy.com. This podcast was produced by Dr. Diana Mason and production assistant Kai Volsey.
And Charlie, what do you have for our third half?
Well, Marianne, the great Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, you mentioned at the top, died recently. This is February. He died last month. He was known as the father of mindfulness, a major influence on Western practices of Buddhism. He was exiled from Vietnam in 1966 after expressing his opposition to the war. In the following year, 1967, Martin Luther King nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. After a 39-year exile, he was permitted to visit Vietnam in 2005. In November of 2018, he returned to Vietnam to his root temple, where he lived until his death at the age of 95. So this is from some of his work. The day my mother died, I wrote in my journal, a serious misfortune of my life has arrived. I suffered for more than 1 year after the passing away of my mother, but one night in the highlands of Vietnam, I was sleeping in the hut of my hermitage. I dreamed of my mother. I saw myself sitting with her, and we were having a wonderful talk. She looked young and peaceful, her hair flowing down. It was so pleasant to sit there and talk to her as if she had never died. When I woke up, it was about 2 a.m, and I felt very strongly that I had never lost my mother. The impression that my mother was still with me was very clear. I understood that the idea of having lost my mother was just an idea. It was obvious in that moment that my mother is always alive in me. I opened the door and went in. I opened the door and went outside. The entire hillside was bathed in moonlight. It was a hill covered with tea plants, and my hut was set behind the temple halfway up. Walking slowly in the moonlight through the towns and rows of tea plants, I noticed my mother was still with me. She was the moonlight caressing me as she had done so often. Very tender, very sweet, wonderful. Each time my feet touched the earth, I knew my mother was there with me. I knew this body was not mine, but a living continuation of my mother and my father and my grandparents and great-grandparents. Of all my ancestors, those feet that I saw as my feet were actually our feet. Together, my mother and I were leaving footprints in the damp soil. From that moment on, the idea I had lost my mother no longer existed. All I had to do was look at the palm of my hand, feel the breeze on my face or the earth under my feet, to remember that my mother is always with me, available at any time.
Oh, isn't that a wonderful
It
writing?
really is. This man was just absolutely wonderful.
A few years ago, I went to a silent retreat with the disciples of Thich Nhat Hanh, and there's, exercises in meditation and in mindfulness and in the practices in his teaching, and it was just a wonderful weekend. If any of our listeners have an opportunity to go do something like that, I'd really recommend it. It was very nice to immerse in his thoughts and his teaching, and just to kind of give your soul a rest.
And and if any of you folks want to, look further into this, when he died, there were several programs that episodes where he had been interviewed. So if you go online and just put in his name, and if you go to our website, you'll see the spelling of his name. You will find different programs. So just very enlightening man, and just the way he spoke and his philosophy, and very good.
Yeah.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of Everyone Dies. Thank you for listening. This is Charlie Navarrete. Remember the insight of Thich Nhat Hanh. Our greatest fear is that when we die, we will become nothing. Many of us believe that our entire existence is only a lifespan beginning the moment we are born or conceived and ending the moment we die.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, even Aunt Sally needed love, and every day is a gift. Thank you.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.